Hi, it's Amy with Behind the Tweet. So this past week, I've been suffering with a cold, which has been frustrating, but knock on wood, I think it's on its way out, I hope. But while I was laying around suffering with symptoms of a cold, I thought, you know what? Let me use that as an example of how I think we need to better understand the immune response in chronic inflammatory disease, in conditions that are deemed autoimmune, or in chronic inflammatory conditions like ME/CFS, or even conditions like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. So right now, you'll see a lot of studies that look at the immune response in patients with these conditions. And a common finding is that different immune cells are activated in patients with these conditions. Microglia might be activated, astrocytes might be activated, T cells will be active and activated. There'll be often just a persistent inflammatory response that's found in patients with these conditions, oxidative stress also. And what is generally happens is that sometimes when, let's say, microglia are found to be activated in a certain condition, the findings of interest, but what I struggle with is the conclusion derived sometimes from that finding. Often what happens is that teams will say, those activated immune cells must be what's driving the root of the condition. This may be an immune condition in which the immune system is malfunctioning and acting incorrectly. And for reasons that we don't yet understand, these immune cells are overactive. They're active for incorrect reasons. And if they're doing anything, they're misfiring. And essentially, this is an immune disease with incorrectly activated cells. Okay, what that leads to then is conclusions that we may want to develop treatment that would suppress or shut down the immune system in patients with these conditions. What I think that analysis fails to account for is that most of the human body is now understood to harbor a vast, extensive human microbiome in human virome. Microbiome ecosystems that persist in most of human tissue and blood. And beyond that, these extensive microbiome ecosystems contain a wide range of pathobionts, which are organisms that can act as serious pathogens under conditions of immunosuppression or under conditions of disease. And basically, on top of that, we also know that there are many well-characterized pathogens already associated with these conditions. Epstein-Barr virus and different microbes different pathogens that often play a role in driving the symptoms of patients who have these given conditions. And so if you take the dysbiosis or imbalance of the microbiome into consideration, the number of pathobionts able to persist in the microbiome into consideration, the fact that pathogens are associated with these conditions in a great number of cases, what you need to do then is to ask the following question. Could activated immune cells in patients with these chronic inflammatory diseases be activated in response to different microbes in the microbiome, in response to different pathogens, in response to imbalance or dysbiosis of the microbiome? Because what's important to understand is that astrocytes and T cells and microglia, their primary role in the human body is to help us target persistent infection or persistent infection. They are key parts of the immune system that help deal with microbes and infectious agents. So in my mind, when you see activated immune cells, the logical next question is, are these cells, which play a key role in the immune system's response to microbes and pathogens, activated in response to any kind of microbiome dysbiosis or pathogens or pathobionts involved in these chronic inflammatory conditions? And in order to better understand how I see that, I want to use a cold or the flu as an example. So what happens when you get the flu? We all agree that the flu is driven by the influenza virus, different strains of the influenza virus. If that virus infects a person, the person develops symptoms. Now we got a runny nose, a fever, aches and pains. We don't feel well. Interestingly, many of those symptoms are not driven by the virus itself. Most of the symptoms that we get when we get the flu are the immune system's response to the virus. In order to eradicate or actually kill the virus, the immune system must mount a battle against it. It must start to target that virus. And to do so, it activates immune cells. It will activate T cells, different immune cells, most immune cells, because influenza is such a serious virus, will activate in response to that pathogen. And that activation is a necessary and normal part of the immune response's ability to start to battle that virus. So what also happens is that we'll see just a general increase in inflammation. We'll also see increases in oxidative stress, cytokine release, chemokine release. All of that is an expected and, again, necessary and normal part of the immune response towards the influenza virus. That is what allows a person with the influenza virus to recover. That immune system battle that involves activated immune cells is what allows the person to finally, to hopefully, target the virus and move towards a state of health. Now, imagine if we didn't realize that the flu was driven by a virus. Let's say we had not characterized the influenza virus and we just had no idea what caused the flu. What would happen, in my opinion, is that we would consider the flu to be a serious immune disease. I wonder what we would call it. We might call it rapid immune system syndrome, or, temporary immune system syndrome. And what would happen is we do study after study that would characterize activated immune cells and inflammation, persistent inflammation over the course of weeks in patients with this, supposed immune condition. We'd have studies that would say immune condition tied to activated T cells, immune condition tied to cytokine and chemokine release, destructive immune condition, tied to persistent inflammation. And what we would end up concluding was that all that inflammation was the body gone wrong. All those activated immune cells were activated for wrong reasons. All that inflammatory response was actually something that we thought was incorrect and that we would want to shut down. And the progression towards treatment would be probably the use of immunosuppressive drugs. We would try to knock down the fever. We would try to knock down the symptoms. What we would not realize is if there was a virus causing the disease, over time, we would be greatly aggravating the condition. In fact, those symptoms associated with that viral infection might never really go away because the immune response would never be activated in order to even give it a chance to battle the virus. So think about that. When it comes to chronic inflammatory disease, there's a similar trend. If we only study the immune response and we only document the presence of activated cells like microglia and T cells and astrocytes, and we conclude from that activation that the immune response is incorrect, or that by definition makes the condition an immune disorder, we may be missing the actual root cause of what is going on. It is very likely that in patients with most chronic inflammatory conditions, the immune response and activated cells are also activated in response to microbiome dysbiosis or imbalance, or they are activated in response to pathobionts or pathogens that can persist as members of the microbiome. There are now hundreds or thousands of studies that even confirm this to be true. Most well-studied autoimmune or inflammatory conditions have been documented to be associated with severe microbiome dysbiosis in different parts of the human body. So what we need to do is study the immune response and the microbiome and pathogens associated with chronic disease at the same time. If we do that, we'll very likely realize that these conditions are not immune disorders. They are likely conditions driven by chronic infectious processes in which immune cells, persistent inflammation, oxidative stress, and other immune parameters are maybe activated as part of a necessary response towards what is happening with microbes in the microbiome. That's my takeaway for today. See you in the next Behind the Tweet.